This video will show you how to make the Molly dress with the collar and pearl sleeves on the Molly dress. This video is going to show you how to piece together a pattern. So if you look at your PDF directions, there's always some sort of overall layout as to what the pattern will look like after you put the pieces together. This is a Simple Life pattern, so each pattern company does it kind of slightly different. This pattern company, you don't have to cut any of the papers, you just simply line up these circles here. So this one's already done, and these are the Brianna shorts or capris or pants. And I'm going to show you another pattern from the Simple Life Pattern Company where I start from the beginning piecing it together to show you how they overlay. So here we have the Molly dress pattern, which is from Simple Life Pattern Company as well. And this one's a little different because it doesn't have the circles on it to show you where to overlay it. And I think it's because there's so few pieces. So instead on this pattern, they have these lines. So what I do is I just overlap these so that these lines match up. You can kind of see through there. And then to kind of conserve tape, I only tape the part that I'm going to be using, like the actual pattern piece. So those would get put together. You have the front and the back, and then here's the collar pieces. So here is another pattern. This is the pearl sleeve. I'm going to be using the pearl sleeve on this Molly dress. So if you notice on this one, it does have numbers. So there's number 23 and number 24, and it does have those circles. So now we're going to just overlap those circles a little bit here and tape them together. And then I should have a third piece here. So I'm missing the very bottom piece of the sleeve there. So it'll look like so when I'm done. And then you cut around your pattern piece for the size, and that's it. Now notice there's only two sizes on here, 2T and 3T. Those are the sizes that I usually go in between for my daughter. When you look at your PDF on your screen here, when you go here to this overlay, you click on here, this is your layers, and then you unclick the sizes that you're not going to use. And that takes all of them off of the pattern, which makes it a little easier for you to cut out. The thing about the Simple Life patterns is that some companies, they provide the skirt. This pattern does not provide the skirt pattern piece. You have on it a cutting chart on one of the pieces, and it's also found in the PDF. And then you look to the size you're gonna make. So I'm gonna make 3T, and it's going to tell me what else I need to cut. And these are all rectangular pieces. So if I was gonna make the top for this, I would cut this 8.5 by 21 inches, and I would need to cut 2. So those are additional pieces that you need to cut for the skirt. So these are the fabrics I've chosen. I'm going to be making the Molly top from this Little Mermaid fabric. Now the Molly top from Simple Life Patterns looks like these here. And I'm going to be taking the pearl sleeve and putting it onto the Molly top. And the Molly top, if you can see here, has a collar. So the purple will be the collar. And then I'm going to be making the Brianna shorts out of this fabric for this outfit. And the Brianna shorts There's the Brianna shorts. Okay, I'm gonna start sewing the Molly dress. So I'm starting here on step 1. It says lay your main front bodice right side up, lay your back main piece on top of it, right sides together, matching up the shoulder seams. Sew the shoulder seams, repeat this step with your lining. So I have white here for my lining, and then I'm using this fabric for the main bodice. So I'm going to do what it shows there. So I'm going to flip my bodice front. Now I am skipping the part where it has you put the, this pattern has optional pin tucks on the front, and I'm not doing that. So the bodice front, these are the bodice backs. Here's my front. And then you do the same thing with the lining. You can use the same fabric for your lining, or you can use a different fabric. So it just depends on what I'm sewing, whether it's going to be the same or a different one. This one's kind of see-through, so I didn't want to use the same because the print would shine through, or would come through. So then I'm just going to sew those shoulder seams on both, and then I think the next step is putting the collar on. Okay, so I put my fabric there underneath the foot. And remember, you always put your foot down, and then you press the pedal. Remember, your seams need to be a 1/2 inch. So know where that falls on your sewing machine. Now here's the shoulder seams on the main bodice. Now I'm going to iron open the seams on the shoulders, and I use this little iron that I got on Amazon. And I'm going to do that for both the lining and the main bodice. Iron open those seams. Okay, so here it talks about the pin tuck placket, so I am skipping that. And I'm going to go down to step 10, which is making the collar. So take a front collar piece, a back collar piece, and you're basically sewing those together, and it repeats with the 3 other sets. And then it looks like you're lining them up, you're sewing, you're gonna trim, make sure you trim your edges and corners well. You wanna clip the curves so that you can turn it. And then you're gonna turn it inside out, iron it flat, and attach it to your main bodice. So I'll take you through those steps right now. These are the collar pieces. You have 4 of the longer ones, which are the front or the back collar pieces, and 4 of the shorter ones, which are the front. You want to line up their ends here, the straight ends, and you're going to be sewing across here. You want to make sure that when you line those up and you flip this over, that your collar is round. So here I am sewing the collar pieces together. One of the things I learned is that if you make your stitch size smaller, so usually here it's at 2.5, and so I brought it down to 1.6. It makes it a lot easier to turn and sew a curved piece. So as long as you don't have to unpick it because of a mistake, it's always good to make it smaller when you're doing a curved piece. So I trimmed the seam. So this was the 1/2 inch seam. I trimmed the seam, and then I clipped the rounded corners so that when I turn this, it's going to be nice and smooth. I'm on step 13 now. This is with your main bodice piece laying flat. Lay your collar on top, match up the shoulder seam to the seam on your collar, pin in place, and repeat with the other collar piece. So I turned my collar pieces and I ironed them nice and flat. It says to line up the shoulder piece, shoulder seam with the shoulder seam here. So it's going to look like so. And I'm going to pin those down, and then I'm going to sew. So I sewed the collar pieces down. I did sew with the smaller seam than a 1/2 inch, and I realized that on these directions, step 13 actually doesn't have you sewing it down. It looks like they have you put the lining on top and then sewing it down. Each pattern company does it slightly different, so it's up to you. You could put the lining down on top and then sew, but I wanted to sew first to make sure that collar stays in place. And the reason I did less than a 1/2 inch seam allowance is because when I do put this lining on top, it will be at a 1/2 inch, and so that way I can make sure that I get this seam within the larger 1/2 inch seam. If they were both at a 1/2 inch, then that might create some problems. So I put the lining on top and I went ahead and I sewed around at a 1/2 inch, and now I'm going to clip this and clip the little cuts again and all the curves so that I can turn it inside out nicely, or right side up. So as you can see here, I went ahead and I clipped and I trimmed. So I'll go ahead and turn it right side out now. So I turned it right side out and I ironed it so it's flat now. Now I'm going to be putting sleeves on this top, and these directions do not have you doing the sleeves. So I'm going to be skipping down to 18, step 18 now, which is top stitching. Now in the directions they have you top stitching the collar. I'm not going to do that. I'm only going to top stitch under here and around in the back here. And then I'm going to go ahead and do my buttonholes. And after that, we'll be doing the sleeves. So top stitching is really up to you whether or not you want to do it. And it's just a matter of preference. So I did the top stitching. See it there? And now I'm going to mark for the buttonholes. So it has you doing them on the left side. And it has them 1 1/2 inch and then another one another 1/2 inch down from there. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that right now. So I marked them. So 1/2 inch down, 1/2 inch from the side. This is 1 inch from the bottom and 1/2 inch in again. So here is my buttonhole foot. I removed the other foot. I put the button at the back here because that's going to tell that foot how big to make your buttonhole. And then you're just going to place it in here. And then you change your settings to buttonholes. So I look here and I want to do this type of buttonhole, so number 35. So I'm going to adjust this to 35. And then lastly, you want to pull down this back gray lever. So I go ahead and I place my foot on there. I did have that cross marked in there where the 1/2 inches met. So we're going to put it right here in the middle. My lever is down and I'm going to go ahead and start. Now I usually don't touch the fabric at all because then it kind of messes it up. There's my buttonhole, and I use the scissors to clip it open. So I opened up the purl pattern and I skipped down to where the sleeve directions are at. So I'm going to start at step 27 here. Mark your sleeves where your gathering stitch should be and do a gathering stitch along the top of your sleeves. So the purpose of doing that is that when you, sometimes it's just to make the sleeve look puffy, other times it's to make sure there's enough easement so you can fit your sleeve into the armhole correctly. And then it has you folding up the bottom twice of the sleeve, but it says not to top stitching. So I took my pattern piece because I hadn't marked it before, and I lined it up on here, and I marked it with the yellow pencil there, flipped it over, and marked it on that side as well. So my gathering stitch is going to be between those two yellow marks. So I'm going to do the shearing on the sleeve, which is where you use elastic thread in your bobbin. And it creates this gather on your sleeve. If you look at the back You can see where that's where the elastic thread has been, but then you have the regular thread on top. There's a lot of great YouTube videos about how to make sure your bobbin is done well for the elastic thread, so you can check those out. I already sewed one line of shearing on here, so I'm going to go ahead and do my second, and then we'll go into how to attach the sleeves. Step 30 has you folding your sleeves in half and then sewing along the seam here. So I went ahead and did that. You unfold where you ironed before and sew it down, and then the next step is folding that hem back up and sewing along that hem. So there is the hem. I sewed the hem on the sleeves, and we'll do the next step, which is putting the sleeves onto the bodice. So this is my bodice, and I'm going to need to sew the sides together. So I'm going to place the two sides together from the main. You're going to do right side to right side. You're going to stitch there, and then you're going to do the same thing with the lining. You're going to bring it around. You're going to do right side to right side, and you're going to stitch it together. So we'll put those two together there, and you're going to be sewing down that. Okay, so I sewed the side seams together and I ironed them. All right, now this is one example of what it looks like once the sleeve is in. So when you put your sleeve into that armhole, it looks like this, right? But that's not going to fit in the armhole. So what I first do is I line up this seam, which is on the bottom of the sleeve, with the bottom side seam. Okay, I line those up. Then I pull the gathering stitches a little bit and make them even, and I ease that sleeve into the armhole until it fits. So here's my sleeve. So this is a size 3 and it's a small sleeve. So I usually put my foot on the inside and I'm just going to sew around. And as I sew, I go ahead and I remove those clips. So I'm going to do that now. So there you have it. I attached the sleeves, and now we're going to work on the skirt. So I'm going to go back to the other pattern. So here we have the directions for putting the placket on the skirt, and I would really recommend you watching this YouTube video on how to do the placket. It's a great video. So I already did the placket following those directions, and now I'm going to sew the side seams. I did the placket first, which doesn't matter. I'm going to sew the side seams together, do the hem, and attach the skirt to the bodice. Okay, so here is the skirt to the top. I hemmed it and I put 2 rows of gathering at the top there, and there's the placket. So now I'm going to attach it to the bodice. So I use my clips to attach the skirt to the bodice. I usually line up the side seams and I line up the center of the skirt with the center of the bodice, and then I move the gatherings around to fit. All right, so I sewed on the skirt part of the top onto the bodice. Now if you have a serger, you can use it. I like to serge around this waist seam on dresses and tops. Keeps it nice and clean. The last step is to top stitch your bodice. So as you go along, you want to make sure that your seam here is pressed up towards the bodice, so that when you're top stitching it, you're top stitching it in place. And you just do it at 1/8 of an inch. So I did my top stitching, and now I'm going to sew the buttons on. I just overlapped the bodice here, and I just mark through the buttonhole where the buttons need to be placed. And there is the finished Molly top with the collar, and then it has the pearl sleeves on it. And both the patterns are from the Simple Life Pattern Company. And then I also made the Brianna shorts from the Simple Life Pattern Company to go with the outfit.